Hi everyone, my name is Richard and welcome to Animation Juice. Today is Move It Monday, where every Monday I share an animation tutorial with you guys, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to do a bouncing ball across the screen using Flash and the Flash motion guide. So let's jump in. Okay, so here we are in Flash, and in the last tutorial we did a straight up and down bouncing ball, and I showed you we covered some fundamentals of animation, including timing, spacing, squash and stretch. And in this tutorial we're going to take those same principles and just progress them one step further, where instead of doing bouncing ball that goes up and down, we're going to do one that goes across the page. And as you can see, I've made one earlier, a simple bouncing ball that just transitions across the screen. Now it has all of, we turn the onion skin tool on, it has all of the basic principles that we talked about. It's got the squash and stretch, where as the ball loses height it begins to stretch out, and then when it contacts the floor it squashes out and immediately bounces back up again into its stretch position, elongates, goes back to its normal shape, and as it comes back down again it starts to elongate, squash as it hits the ground, and so on and so on. So it's got the squash and stretch. It's also got the timing being how long it takes the ball to do a certain number of bounces. In this case the timing is 42 frames, and in that time it does 1, 2, 3, 4 and a bit bounces. And it's also got the spacing, where we said the spacing, in order to show the ball speeding up or something speeding up, you increase the spacing of the drawings. So you progressively make the drawings further and further apart, and that makes it look like the ball or whatever it is moving faster. And the converse of that is true, where if you want to show something slowing down, you add more for it. You space the drawings closer together, and you can see here the spacing of the drawings begin to gradually increase as the ball gains momentum, as gravity takes hold, and then the drawings become more closely spaced as the ball comes back up again and loses momentum. So what I want to show you is how to use the principles of animation and use them in conjunction with the motion guide in Flash to get this bouncing ball to move nicely across the page, but without having to draw every single frame. And what I'm going to do is make a new layer, and let's grab the oval tool. I'm just going to draw a ball on the screen like that. And like we did last week, if you select that ball and if you go to modify, convert to symbol, let's call it ball. I'm going to leave it as a graphic symbol. There's our ball. Now what we're going to do is right click on our, hang on, let's just rename our layer. It's always a good habit to get into. Let's call it the flash ball. Okay, so if you right click on the flash ball layer and go to add classic motion guide, and you'll see what that's done is it's giving you an extra layer, and on this extra layer is where we're going to draw. We're going to draw a path for this ball to follow. We're going to draw this motion guide. In order to do that, we're going to use the line tool, which is just below the text tool in the tool menu. I'm just going to turn on onion skin so that we can see our traditional hand-drawn ball, so we can see what the path is of that. I'm going to draw a line with the line tool from the center of the ball. I'm going to draw it up to the top of the arc, and I'm also going to make sure that my snapping is turned on. We're going to want these, we need to make sure that this arc that we're drawing is one continuous line, and then there's no irregular joints. So come down to the menu on the left and click Snap to Objects. It's a little magnet tool, and that's gonna make sure that our lines are snapping to each other as we're drawing them. So I'm just drawing from the center of the ball on the squash to the center of the ball at the top of the arc. Just and the sort of little one here. Oops, let's just drag that down. Okay. The shortcut for the line tool is N on your keyboard. And then let's finish it off. If we turn that off, what you can see is we've got this jaggedy line. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn these lines into arcs. If we click A and click on our line, you'll see we get all our anchor points. And then now if we click C and hold Shift, what that's going to do is shift and drag, and we're going to get these nice arcs happening. Let's just turn on our onion skin so we can see what we're doing. Okay, and so we're just going to go to the top of each anchor point, hold Shift, and click and drag. By holding Shift, we get nice horizontal straight anchor points, which is what we want to make nice equal arcs, symmetrical arcs. Just going to go to the top of each of our points. I'm just going to do that, and the same thing at the beginning, just clicking on the point and dragging it. And now you can see that we've got a nice path for our ball to travel on. Now this is part of what the principles that we talk about. All things should travel on nice arcs. If something looks a bit weird with your animation, looks a bit jumpy, the first thing you need to check is your arcs. And so that's all we've done here. We've created a nice path for this ball to follow. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to attach this our ball moving clip to the beginning of this arc, and it's going to almost latch itself onto it, and it's going to, when we start applying tweens, it's going to only tween and animate along the path. So in order to do that, make sure the magnet tool is selected in the tools menu, because that's going to allow us to snap to it. And just grab the ball, and as soon as you move it over close to the line, you'll notice it just sort of snaps to it. See, I'm just sort of moving the mouse up and down now, and it's just, see, just sort of bonk, 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 bonk. Okay, so let's just move it to its start position. Now, one thing that's going to make our lives a little bit easier is if we rotate. We're going to be wanting to squash and stretch our ball, and as you can see in our hand-drawn example, the ball is stretching perpendicular to our perpendicular. Is it perpendicular? It's stretching in the direction of our arcs. So when the ball stretches out, as on its upward path and its downward path, it's stretching out perpendicular to our arcs. So you can see currently that our transform handles are not perpendicular to our arc. They're at 90 degrees. So what's going to make our lives a lot easier is if we rotate our ball so that the handles are sort of perpendicular to our arc. and that is going to make squashing and stretching it out a lot easier. Okay, so now that's done, we are going to start animating, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a keyframe at the top and the bottom of each of our arcs. So let's just start at the beginning. We're in the right place there. Let's go to frame 8. Hit F6 to make a keyframe and drag your ball down to the bottom of your arc. Now let's go to the top of the next arc. So frame 13. Hit F6 to make a keyframe. And with the magnet tool still selected, just drag it to the top of the next arc. And we just keep going like this. Next squash frame, which is there, hit F6 to make a keyframe and drag the ball to the bottom of the arc. Now, I can't stress enough, you must have the Snap to Objects tool selected when you're doing this, otherwise it will just go, when you start tweening the whole thing, it will just go crazy. The ball will float across the page, so it just needs to be attached to the line. Okay, so let's go to the top of the next arc. Hit F6, drag the ball to the top. Go to the bottom again, the squash frame 28, F6. Let's move down there. Top of the next arc, hit F6, just drag it up. Bottom of the next arc, hit F6. And then let's just go to the very end and hit F6. There's not much really of an arc. Okay, so what that looks like is the ball is just happening. We're just keeping the ball at the top and the bottom of all of the arcs. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to tween this whole thing. So if you select the entire, all of the keyframes of the flash ball, right click and then click Create Classic Tween. And you can see that now our ball travels along the motion path. It's alright, it works, but it doesn't have the basic principles that our traditional ball has. So we just need to go and do a few adjustments and get Flash to really work with us. What we're first going to do is we're going to add the stretches as the ball descends. It's going to stretch out a little bit. So what I want to do is press a keyframe just before the ball hits the floor, all the contact positions, and the ball squashes. I'm just going to go to the frame prior to that and hit F6. And I'm really going to do that, I mean, towards the end as the ball loses all momentum. There isn't really going to be much squash and stretch. So I'm only really going to do it on the first 1, 2, 3 bounces, because that's where the most energy is. So we put a keyframe before the squash, and I'm also going to put a keyframe after the squash. So we've got a keyframe there, squash. Let's add another keyframe. So we've got a keyframe there, squash, another keyframe, and then let's just leave it as is. What that's going to do is it's going to allow us to have our single squash frame. Like you can see, we're going to add in our squash frames. So in order to get the transform, just hit Q and just grab our handles and squash it into place. Now again, I'm going to turn off the Snap to Objects tool for this, just so we can get nice. It's just easy to make the squash frame. So let's do that. On this squash frame, let's just rotate it. There. Go to the next squash frame. And just one thing to note on the squashes, I'm squashing it less and less with each bounce. So it's quite squashed there, slightly less squashed than that one, and it's even, let's just make that so it's even less squashed on the third one. Because again, it's losing, as we're going across the page, it's losing momentum, it's losing energy, it's not going to squash as much. So now we're going to go in and add the stretch part of squash and stretch. We've done the squashes, stretching out. So again, just going to hit Q for the transform, and I'm just going to stretch the ball out to match our guide layer. Okay, let's go to this stretch frame immediately after the first squash. Just move it into position. Again, you're going to want to just keep going backwards and forwards with the snap to objects tool just to make it easier to stretch it accurately. Okay, let's go to the next stretch frame. So that's just before the squash frame on the next one. Let's just move it into place. There we go, and the stretch frame. Just after the squash. Go, and there's a little, I mean, by this time again there's really not much squash and stretch happening, so I think we're just gonna leave it about there. So let's just see what that's done. Okay, so it's getting better. There is a little bit of squash and stretch happening now, but it doesn't feel like the ball is being affected by gravity. So what we're going to do now is we've done the squash and stretch principle. Now let's do another pass and do our spacing, because as we say, spacing is going to make the ball look like it's speeding up and slowing down and give the illusion of gravity affecting it. So we're going to add in our spacing. Now Flash provides us with an easing tool. Now in order to invoke the easing tool, just click on the first tween, somewhere between the first and the second keyframe, just on that, the purple bar with the arrow, and then go to properties. And you'll see under Tweening there's an ease tool. If you use a minus value, it weights the spacing towards the first keyframe. And the bigger the minus value, the more it spaces the values to the drawings to the first keyframe. But if you use a positive value, you can see it spaced the drawings progressively closer to the second keyframe. As this is a ball being affected by gravity, we want to weight the drawings towards the first keyframe. So it's gone up to the first arc, it's losing momentum, and it's gradually speeding up as we go down to the floor. And to show that the ball is speeding up, we need to space the drawings further apart. So that's why we use the minus value to make more drawings towards the first keyframe and less drawings towards the second keyframe. And as you can see, it looks like it's getting faster on the way down. Now we want the opposite on the way back up again. So let's, on the tween where the ball is going back up, click somewhere in the middle of our tween and go to positive 100. And that's going to space the drawings closer towards the top of the arc, which will make it look like the ball is slowing down, which is what we want. It looks like gravity is affecting it. Now let's go again to the next descent and turn that to a minus 100, and you'll see there becomes a rhythm. On the way down, minus 100. On the way up, positive 100. On the way down, minus 100. On the way up, positive 100. Minus 100, and so on. And you'll see now that feels a lot better. Let's just feel it real time. Turn off our traditional bouncing ball. Now it feels okay. It feels okay. It's a lot better than it was, but there are still a few things that we can do to make this feel and look even better. Feels good, but we can make it better. To get that added snap and that added vitality, we want to show a bit of contrast. And so, right before the ball is very squashed, I want to show the ball very stretched. But only for that frame. I don't want it I don't want the whole thing to look really stretchy and squashy. I just want it. So, in order to do that, what I'm going to do is hit F6 on the frame just before our contact position. And move the ball back up and give it less of a stretch. So that's going to stretch the ball out, but not to its extreme length. Then we're going to get one frame where it's really stretched, one frame where it's really squashed, one frame where it's really stretched again on its way back up, and then I want to hit an F6 again to do the reverse. So we're going to unstretch the ball and just move it into position. Now when you do that, you just need to make sure that your ease is done. Every time you hit F6, it sort of removes the keyframe again, so just make sure that's set back to positive 100. And the same thing again, we're going to hit F6 just before the next contact frame, the next extreme stretch, and just unstretch this ball a little bit just to fit more with what's happening in our traditional one. And now, like I said, after we get to these later arcs, because there's so much momentum being lost, you're not going to see really much of that squash and stretch really. So just do it on the first couple of arcs where there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of squash and stretch happening. So let's see what that's done. Now that feels so much nicer. You know, there's a little bit of stretch. What's that? There's a little bit of stretch on the way down, just a little bit between the first keyframe where there's no stretch, and as gravity starts to take effect, there's a little bit of stretch. It's not huge, but then we've got our really big, exaggerated stretch frame. Immediately after, you've got the squashed frame, so you've got that contrast. You've got the ball at its most stretched, next to the ball at its most squashed, followed by the frame and in its stretch position again as it goes back up. So you've only got one frame in the bounds, and that's just going to add a little bit. It's going to add vitality. It's not going to be a mushy, boring bouncing ball. Come on, guys, this is animation. Give it some snap, and the way to give it snap is just to exaggerate the frame, to exaggerate the stretch and the squash, but just around the areas of contact. You don't want the ball stretching out from the very top of the arc all the way down to the bottom, because that's what Flash will give you with tweens. So you need to do more of the work. You need to add in some keyframes to define you need to use the knowledge of the animation principles and define more descriptive and accurate keyframes that Flash can follow. There is still a couple of other things that we need to do, and you'll notice that when the ball is traveling down, we set an easing value of -100 on the first bounce, and on the way back up again there's an easing value of +100. However, we want to give less extreme spacing as the ball is losing momentum. So instead of setting all of our arcs, ups and downs, to positive and -100 easing value, on this second bounce, on both the up and the down, I'm just going to change the value to +75, and on the way back down again -75. And on the third bounce, see again it's 100. It's too extreme. It's lost a lot of momentum. We don't want the extreme spacing, the extreme slows and the extreme fasts happening towards the end of this bounce, because it's just lost so much momentum. So we've got 100, 75, 75. Let's knock it down to 50. +50, and on the way back down -50. And that just feels like it's really losing momentum. Now what I'm just going to do, you can adjust the motion guide mid animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reduce the height of our very last art, because the ball, it wouldn't really bounce that high. So all I'm going to do is just zoom in by pressing Z to invoke the magnifying glue, and just zoom into this last vertices in your arc and hit A and what A is going to do is going to allow you to grab the vector point and just move it around and just move it so it's a shallower arc, and you see the ball comes with it because it's attached to our motion curve, which is really handy. So let's come back out again. Even that is still too much. It's too much. Let's just do that. Just a little bit more, I think. About there. There. Okay. Bounce, bounce. Now we're almost done. There's just one last thing to do. Bounce, bounce, bounce. With all the bounces, and we've got really nice squash and stretch happening. We've got really nice spacing happening. The last thing is just as the ball comes to a final resting point, you can see it sort of slowing down, slowing down, slowing down, and then there's a final little bump. But then it sort of speeds up towards the end. It sort of just at the very last bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this last frame and just stretch it out a little bit more. And for the last tween, I'm going to set it to positive 100. So that means that the spacing is going to space the drawings progressively close together towards our last keyframe, which will make it look like it's slowing down to a complete halt. So that feels a lot better. We've just spaced the ending out, so that it now eases to a complete stop. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. That is how you use the Adobe Flash Classic Motion Guide to create the arcs that your ball will travel along as it bounces along the screen. I hope it's really showing you how you can use the knowledge of good animation principles and really wrangle with whatever whatever tool you're using in Flash to create the desired result of good animation. So that's it for this episode of Move It Monday. You can find the resource files in the description below. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the video. And also, I'd love to hear what is your experience of the Motion Guide tool. Do you find it easy to use? I personally find it a little bit fiddly, but in the long run, it does speed up your workflow. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Until next week's Move It Monday, have a great week, and I'll see you later.